Hello and welcome everyone to TCG's 31st National Conference and our second conference in virtual space. We are so grateful that you're here. My name is Teresa Eyring. I'm the Executive Director of TCG, and I use she, her, hers pronouns. I'm zooming from the unceded lands of the Lenape, colonially known as Manhattan. And for people with visual access needs, I'd like to offer a visual description. I am a white woman with brown hair that's about shoulder length. I'm wearing a salmon colored top, and I am sitting in a room that has a wall filled with pictures, mostly paintings, and an oval shaped mirror.
Hi, and I'm Adrian Badu, the Deputy Director and COO of TCG, and I use he, him pronouns. It's so nice to see all of you, and I cannot wait to connect in person very soon. Today, I am zooming from the land of the Lenape peoples, and for visual access, I'm male, I have short black hair with a dusting of gray, and I'm wearing a green shirt. At this time, we'd like to thank our lead sponsors for today's opening plenary, the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation, Fisher Dax Associates Theater Planning and Design, and the Howard Gilman Foundation. Please drop a few love emojis and high fives in the chat. Today is the first day in part one of TCG's 2021 virtual conference, Our Theater Ecology. Next week, we'll hold part two and our 60th anniversary gala celebration, where we will honor Ricardo Kahn and the Performing Arts Alliance, and we will feature the hostess with the mostest and drag superstar Shaquita. If you don't have your ticket yet, tickets are pay what you will, so please grab a ticket, roll out the red carpet in your living room or your backyard, grab your favorite sips, perhaps grab a friend or five, get glammed up, and please come party with us. It's gonna be a lot of fun.
And we know we're not the only ones with really full dance cards this month. We are all holding so much right now. We're trying to keep everything we learned from this past year, holding on to the ways we made theater accessible during a pandemic, while also right now reopening or thinking about reopening and rehiring at a scale we've never seen before. We're doing all that while also reckoning with injustice in our field and in our country. And we're doing all that while grieving losses that we couldn't properly grieve during a time of social distancing. It's been a lot, and it's not over. That's why it's meaningful to us that you've chosen to be here today. So thank you very much.
We plan to use our time together to focus on three convergent areas of opportunity: pandemic recovery, climate action, and systemic anti-racism, while centering the needs and experiences of Black, Indigenous, and all people of color or BIPOC in the theater field and of theaters of color. I also want to say that while TCG may use BIPOC organizationally, we know it's always better to be specific about someone's identity. So please use the words that work for you. We've provided more context around our language decisions, as well as some suggested practices for our time together in the community agreements that we posted on Mighty Networks, and we'll drop the link in the chat. This year, in lieu of affinity spaces at this conference, we will be gathering and celebrating Black, Indigenous, and people of color, as well as Black theaters, Indigenous theaters, and theaters of color in affinity from June 7th through June 11th, including our annual can't miss Theaters of Color party. Please stay tuned for more information.
Thanks for that, Adrian. Now, before we get started, I wanted to share TCG's language for land acknowledgement in the chat, and I also encourage you to share your. I'd also like to say that while land acknowledgements are important, they are not enough by themselves. We must also take action in support of Native-led movements for justice. In the chat, we're sharing some information about Land Back, a movement to connect, coordinate, resource, and amplify land back movements across Turtle Island, or what is colonially known as the United States. Please share your own opportunities for action in the chat. It's also important to recognize and support the vibrant expanse of contemporary Native theater that's being made in communities every day.
Thank you, Teresa. While I acknowledge our plenary sponsors, earlier, now it's my pleasure to thank all our funders, sponsors, and exhibitors for making this virtual conference possible. As I name them, please feel free to give them a clap emoji or a heart emoji in the chat, and be sure to connect with some of them in their virtual exhibitor rooms on Mighty Network. The Doris Duke Charitable Foundation, the Howard Gilman Foundation, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, the Schubert Foundation, the Hearst Foundations, New York State Council on the Arts, the Wallace Foundation, the Ruth Easton Fund of the Edelstein Family Foundation, Fisher Dax Associates Theater Planning and Design, the Sherry and Les Biller Family Foundation, Charcoal Blue, New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, Schuler Shook Theater Planning and Light and Design, Threshold Acoustics, Walt Disney Imagineering, the Thomas S. Keenan Institute for the Arts, the Arts Insurance Program, and Instant Encore. Thank you so much. And don't forget to drop those love emojis in the chat.
Thanks for that, Adrian. I just wanted to give a little minute for the love emojis to drop. Also, just wanted to express gratitude. Thank you all again for being with us today. I also want to express gratitude to our individual donors who have so generously shown up for TCG over the past year. We really appreciate you. And if you're not already a supporter of TCG, you can go to tcg.org/donate or click on the link in the chat to become one.
Now it's my pleasure to welcome our open and plenary speaker to the space. For focus and accessibility during this plenary, only our speakers' cameras are turned on. After Eric's remarks, you'll be able to turn on your camera and ask questions. In addition to Eric's many works, Eric Liu is the author of You're More Powerful Than You Think, and also the co-founder of Citizen University. Among the many highlights of his career, Eric served as a White House speechwriter for President Bill Clinton, and later as the president's deputy domestic policy advisor. Eric will speak for a few minutes, then former TCG conference team member Hannah Fenlon, who recently completed a fellowship with Eric's organization, will moderate a conversation with him. And if you have questions for Eric, or you just want to remember some of the really smart things he said and shared today, please put them in the Padlet. We'll share a link to the Padlet in the chat now. It's super easy. It's an easy way to share notes, and it's a great way to collect all our questions and just love for Eric. So please give it a try. With that, I want to welcome Eric and thank him for joining us. Eric, the Zoom is all yours.
Thank you so much, Adrian. Thank you, Teresa. And thanks to all of you for gathering today. My name is Eric Liu. I am coming to you from Seattle, Washington, where the First Peoples are Duwamish. And I am so grateful to spend this time with you. I wanted also to give folks a sense of where I am and who I am. I'm in my home office in a room with a window facing me and a brick behind me, painted white. I am Chinese American. I've got a kind of a modified flat top, I guess, very short hair and glasses. And I'm just so pleased to be here. I wanted to begin today just by acknowledging the depth of the thinking and feeling that has gone into everything that TCG is doing. And that depth is perceptible to me as someone coming from the outside. And it relates, of course, I know, to a lot of organizational and institutional choices, a lot of leadership conversations about everything from language to programming to commitments, internal and external. But what I think it really comes down to is relationship. I am here in part because of relationships. Hannah Fenlon, who will be joining me in conversation a little while longer, as Adrian said, is someone who I came to know recently because she was trained as one of our Civic Saturday Fellows at Citizen University, and I'll tell you more about what that is. But the invitation also came through a dear friend, Stephanie Ibarra from Baltimore Center Stage, who is on our board at Citizen University. And I am most of all here in a deeper sense because the co-founder of Citizen University with me is my wife, Janae Kane, who is a great theater artist for many years, helped run a fringe theater company here in Seattle called One World Theater, and whose way of seeing and being, shaped by the theater, has shaped both me and Citizen University. So those are just a few of the relational ways in which I may be coming from the outside, but I feel very much of this group and of this community because I've been so shaped by theater. I really wanted to actually also say a couple of words of further just reflection about what it is to be doing work as we do at Citizen University around revitalizing our democracy, and to be doing work as all of you do in trying to advocate for and revitalize and, you know, as I think you literally have said in some of your recent documents, think about reestablishing, refounding the ecology and ecosystem of American theater. And I think it would be helpful for me just to begin by telling you a bit about what we do at Citizen University. We're a nonprofit based here in Seattle, and all of our work is about trying to foster a culture of powerful, responsible citizenship. And I want to unpack each element of that description. First of all, our name, Citizen University, citizenship. I hasten to add and to note that we mean that word, citizen and citizenship, in the kind of deepest, broadest ethical sense. We're not talking about documentation status, papers and passports. We mean this deeper sense of being a member of the body, a contributor to community, someone who sees themselves wherever they're from, wherever their ancestors are from, as having both a claim to this place and responsibility to it. So that's one part of our language. But the other piece of the language that I want to unpack and emphasize here is culture, a culture of powerful, responsible citizenship. Culture, I don't need to tell all of you, is foundational. We live in a time right now, and indeed a lot of the work that you all recently have been doing has been reckoning with the fact that there's so much emphasis on structural change, structural racism, structural injustice, structural inequity. And we are focusing rightly on a lot of ideas to change structure, whether that's in a criminal justice system, whether that's in the pipeline of who even enters the worlds and professions of theater, whether that's in our tax and immigration system, whether it's in how we as a society have unevenly, let's put it nicely, dealt with this pandemic. And so we're talking a lot about structure, but our belief at Citizen University is that as important as structure is, culture precedes structure. Culture is upstream of structure. Culture, by which I mean our norms, our narratives, our habits, our unspoken ways of forming a sense of us and we, and defining who is us in any given setting, that is all upstream of culture, that all shapes the frame of the possible when it comes to structure. So if you have a culture that is selfish, individual, hyper-individualistic, materialistic, without memory, without a sense of connection, atomistic, isolated, then you will have a very narrow frame of the possible when it comes to structural change. As much as you might wish for great collective action and great sweeping structural changes on race and justice and economic inequality, you will not be able to move the ball very much because the underlying culture blinds too many people, blocks too many people from the ability to recognize what is possible. And so culture in that deeper sense is so much a part of our work. And so I give you that context and explanation, not just as a matter of pandering to people who are in cultural organization and organizations and in the arts. but for us to say that we need to have the confidence to, number one, define culture broadly. It's not only the creative and performing arts, it is all the ways in which we shape this unspoken fabric of the story of us. But number two, that we need to treat this and assert this work, not as secondary to the quote, real work of the economy, the real work of a society, the real work of changing things in our country, but that this is actually central and foundational to any aspiration we have for what we can be as Americans. When we talk about citizenship at Citizen University, we often actually use this very simple equation that I'd like to share with you, and have that equation maybe frame up the thoughts that I want to offer today as provocations and inspiration, perhaps, as you think about your work, both as members of TCG and in your various institutions all around the United States. The equation that we have goes like this: power plus character equals citizenship. What I mean by that is that citizenship, in this broad, capacious understanding, requires both a literacy in power, a fluency in power, and the understanding that power is not like a language, it is a language. It is a thing that we speak, read, and write, unwittingly, sometimes poorly, but that it is something that is learnable. And this idea that power is a literacy is so important, because there are too many of us, and frankly, too many folks in the worlds of cultural institutions and the arts who have a mixed or even a negative relationship with power. The idea is that power is a thing that people over there have. Power is a thing that people have and use against us. Power is a thing that is lorded over me. One of our core messages in our work at Citizen University, and the way that we teach and create learning experiences for people, is to recognize that no, power is coursing and flowing all around us at all times. And the only choice that matters is whether in the first place we are willing to see that, to name that, and to claim it. And when I talk about power, I talk about it in a way that isn't apologetic. We have so many associations with power, that power is a dirty word: power trip, power hungry, power mad. And if you have that initial reflex yourself of, oh, I don't talk about power, I certainly don't talk about it that openly, because that's dirty. That's what politicians do. That's what the people who were that's what the people who've been running American theater for so long do. And we're trying to kind of be not like them. No. Get comfortable with this language. Get comfortable with the ways of seeing and claiming power, understanding power in all its different sources and forms: money power, people power, ideas power, the power of social norms, the power of state action and government, the power of force and violence. All of these forms and sources of power are on vivid display right now in our society and around the world. But you don't have to look to the headlines, you don't have to read the paper. You can just look within the operations of your own theater. Look within the operations and the doings and the work within the TCG ecosystem. Understand the ways in which money, people, ideas, social norms, government action are all playing out to shape, again, the frame of the possible. And as we get comfortable with understanding these different sources of powers, it also behooves us to understand that power is not just this blob over there that behaves in ways that are mysterious to us. Power actually is a thing that we can understand, and understand as behaving in some predictable ways. We teach at Citizen University 3 fundamental laws of power that I want to share with you. Law number 1, power concentrates. We know this. Those of you who are in New York certainly know this, in the epicenter of inequality. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. Those with some clout tend to get more clout. Those who initially get cast in plays tend to get cast in more plays. Right? Power compounds and it concentrates. Those who have tend to get more if the system is left to its own workings. And that is not only because people are the way people are. That is the nature of complex adaptive systems in nature. Take people out of the equation. In any kind of system, things tend toward clumping and concentration when the system is left to itself. And so anytime you hear an idea, whether in economics or in cultural work, that we should be more laissez-faire, just let things play out. Let the hidden hand of the marketplace work its magic. What you are hearing is a justification for the current allocations and the current clumpings and concentrations of power. People are saying, I'm perfectly comfy with the way that power has unequally landed. So don't question it. And that brings me to the second law of power, which is that power justifies itself. At every turn, in every situation, incumbent holders of power, whether individuals or institutions or groups, will spin elaborate narratives, fairy tale level stories about why this is the God-given way of things, why this is the inherent nature of things. This is the narrative of white supremacy. This is the narrative of male supremacy in so many institutions. This is the narrative of, well, I know best because fill in the blank, right? And I think these narratives of justification are so prevalent and so much a part of what we get used to that we sometimes don't even see them. Again, I think one of the things that theater during the pandemic, theater as a sector during the pandemic, and the arts as a sector during the pandemic have had to reckon with is the limitations of a narrative that's been in the background for so long of how our society thinks about support for the arts. And that background is a background narrative of trickle-down economics. The idea that the way an economy should run is that we should let a few people, the super rich, accumulate their wealth and not trouble them too much. In fact, pay tribute to them if we can. Certainly don't tax them and certainly don't regulate them too much. And if we are nice enough to that few with so much of the wealth, then perhaps some of their prosperity will leak its way down to the rest of us. And we in the culture business can run around with our little buckets and catch some of those leaks of the prosperity coming trickling down our way, right? Said that way, you might think, well, I certainly don't behave that way. That's not my self story. But then I think if we look honestly at the ways in which cultural organizations, arts organizations, theaters, nonprofits in general move in the world and have to move in the world, as Bridget's saying in chat, that's literally how we're going. We're running around trying to catch drops. And it behooves us from time to time to ask, is this the only way actually we can get prosperity? Is this the only way in which things can happen? And the answer, of course, is no. The answer is that trickle-down economics is only a story, a narrative of justification, and that there is an alternative story that I call middle-out economics, a story that says that actually true prosperity does not leak its way down from a few at the top. True durable prosperity emerges from the middle out and the bottom up. To put it in purely economic terms, when workers have more money, businesses have more customers. If people could make a living wage in your community, then those folks, you know, if their minimum wage in your town went from $8 or $9 an hour to 14, 15, 16 bucks an hour, where do you think the average low-wage worker would park that extra money? You think they'd go put it in an offshore account in the Cayman Islands? No, they would spend it. They would circulate it. They would circulate it into the economy, and not just to make rent, not just to buy new clothes for school for their kids, not just to maybe take their partner out for a nice dinner from time to time, but yes, actually to recognize that the arts are not a luxury and to go to the theater, to support the arts, to recognize their participation as citizens in a creative ecosystem. That requires telling a different story. So if all we had were these first two laws of power, that power is always concentrating and clumping into fewer and fewer hands. And again, that one I didn't spend a lot of time unpacking because we live in this age in America. Well, we live in a time not seen since before the Great Depression of radical levels of inequality and hoarding and concentration of wealth. And that is a case where correlation is in fact causation, because when things get that lopsided and that concentrated, the system cannot stand. It will tip over and collapse. So if all you have are these first two laws, that power is always concentrating, and number one, and then number two, power is always justifying itself, you'd be stuck in a pretty grim doom loop, right? I'm kind of telling you a bummer of a story right now. But what breaks us out of that doom loop is law number three. And law number three is this. And actually, I tell you this not because it should be new to you, but because it is literally the practice of everyone in the theater. Law number 3 is this: power is infinite. Power is infinite. I want you to sit with that, and I want you to hear it not as a dude from Seattle tapping into new age vibes and, you know, asking you to manifest wealth and it'll appear. No, no, no. I mean that in even the most rigged game, in even the most unfair, unjust situation in history and in the present day, in even those situations, it is entirely possible to generate brand new power out of thin air through the magic act of organizing. Organizing, inviting 1, 2, 5, 10, 100 other people into a common endeavor with common goals, requiring common efforts at expressing imagination, and then common efforts to apply that imagination in creative acts. That work of organizing and inviting and creating together generates power where it did not exist previously. And so the other thing about the times we're living in is that they are also the most vivid exhibit for law number 3, because it's precisely in this rigged, unequal, unjust time that you are seeing movements of every kind arise from the bottom up and the middle out to challenge, to push back against the current allocations of power. And honestly, you see this all across the board. You see this in ways that you can cheer and join. Me Too, Black Lives Matter. But you see it in ways that I suspect very few in this room would cheer. The 3 percenters, the insurrectionists on January 6th, Occupy Wall Street and the Tea Party a decade ago couldn't have been more different in style, in politics, in partisan voting patterns, but they were of the same phenomenon. They were of the same dynamic. They were both examples of the infinitude of power. Neither Occupy Wall Street nor the Tea Party, neither people who joined the Sanders movement nor the people who got on the Trump train had permission to do so. The establishments in every case poo-pooed them, denied them legitimacy. And in every case, those folks organized, those folks showed up, those folks persisted in ways that said, you know what, we do not accept the current frame of the possible. We will change that frame. We will be heard. And if it sounds like I'm celebrating the Trump train equally with moral equivalence to the Sanders movement or occupying the Tea Party, I'm not. But as a student of power and a practitioner of power, I believe it is absolutely necessary for us to see things fully, not only to see the things we like and to appreciate and recognize the patterns where we agree with them, but particularly actually to understand them when we don't. And that brings me to the second part of this broad equation that I described, because if all you have is a literacy in power, if all you do is understand these 3 laws of power and you start thinking about how I can apply these laws and think about changing the frame of the possible in my work, how I can move and manipulate people, money, ideas, social norms to get what I want. And by the way, that is the very simple way that I define power: the capacity to ensure that others do as you would like them to do, right? Kind of dirty, kind of menacing, right? Kind of Game of Thrones or House of Cards sounding. But again, get over it. Get over that feeling of menace and domination, because if you are honest as a human, and certainly if you've ever been to theater school, you know that people are always wanting to get something from other people. You know that it is the way of human nature to try to get others to do as you would like them to do. To be cliche, what's your objective, right? But if all we do is have literacy and fluency in power and to think about ways in which we can get what we want, and that literacy and that fluency in power is untethered to any moral core, any ethical framework, then all we have become is highly skilled sociopaths. And at Citizen University, our conception, I think I got muted there. I'm not sure how much you missed there. I will rewind a second just to say that if all you have is fluency and power disconnected from any ethical moral core, then you're just a finely skilled sociopath. And so the second half of this equation, power plus character, is what matters as well. And character, I don't mean individual virtue. Again, so much of American life is about this hyper individualism, this rugged individualist myth and narrative. That's all about me, my grit, my perseverance, me pulling myself up by my bootstraps. Look, I'm all for grit, right? That's the super popular word and idea right now. There's not a person in this room right now who didn't have grit, who doesn't have grit. But what I'm talking about is not individual virtue. I'm talking about what you might call character in the collective, how we live in public, how we hold together a community. And character in this collective sense is about mutuality. It's about reciprocity. It's about shared responsibility, not only sharing amongst ourselves, but responsibility to the past and to the future. It is about recognizing that life is not just a one-round game in which I'm going to get all that I can for me right now. No history, no legacy. Civic character is about recognizing the ways in which we are but stewards of this moment, of this land, of this time, of the society, of this creation. Civic character is about recognizing that in contrast to the culture that tells us every man, every woman for themselves, that in fact we are all better off when we're all better off. To say that we're all better off when we're all better off is not some, again, naive notion. It is this idea that it has its corollary when I spoke about middle out economics. When workers have more money, businesses have more customers, and everybody's better off. And what is true of money capital is true of social capital. What is true of money capital is true of relational, institutional, intellectual, emotional capital. The more we circulate, the more we all prosper and thrive. The other dimension of civic character that is so important to emphasize, and again, something that you all know in the world of theater, is that society becomes how you behave. I used to say this a lot before the pandemic, and I used to use metaphors of contagion to remind folks that, look, again, part of the American civic ethos that dominates right now is I should be able to do whatever the hell I want, as long as I'm not actively harming or hurting somebody, right? That's unfortunately what people mean when they say it's a free country. That's a very childish notion of what freedom means. Again, the only categories of people who get to think that freedom is all about rights without responsibilities are toddlers and our aforementioned sociopaths. But if you understand freedom as responsibility, if you understand liberty as obligation, then you understand that society becomes how you behave, that your choice to be compassionate or not, civil or not, engaged or not, courteous or not, committed to justice or not, is not just your choice to be canceled out in the vast marketplace of choices by someone else's choice to not do that. No, your choice is a node of contagion. You set off a cascade of contagion, as does every omission of yours. As I say, that metaphor before the pandemic meant one thing, but I think COVID, as I often say, Professor COVID has taught us a lot in these last 15 months, brutally, relentlessly. And what we've learned is that society becomes how you behave. There is no way to cabin off your privilege from someone else's privation during a pandemic. There ain't no wall high enough to stop the spread of a virus. And even as we in the United States have kind of gotten our act together, relatively speaking, the fact that India is in the pain that it's in right now is not a, whew, glad I'm not them, any more than when you were in New York City and you might have lived in a very comfortable place and you were looking at those frontline workers or those people who, immigrant communities who were living four to a room and still had to go to work because they needed to make a living. And you looked at them and you thought, whew, glad I'm not them. The lesson of civic character is you are them. There is no them. We are bound together in these ways. And what it means for us to practice civic character is not just to say that and to know that and to think that, but to act that. At the beginning of the pandemic, we all heard wonderful bromides and cliches about we're all in it together. And Then George Floyd was murdered, and we heard a lot of, in a similar vein, professions of justice, professions of commitment to unwinding injustice. And look, talk, I'm in the talk business. Talk matters, right? Talk is not necessarily cheap, but talk is most meaningful when it's connected not only to action in some strange bifurcated way. Talk is a form of action, but talk is most meaningful when it's connected to a deeper challenge of self-reflection and a deeper and explicit recommitment to a different kind of creed. I am describing the work of TCG. I am describing the work that you all have been doing. And I think the work that you've been doing organizationally, sectorally, and in each of your institutions has been about helping each other and helping other Americans face our history, face ourselves, face each other, and face our future. It's not just that Janae, my wife and co-founder, comes from the theater. It's that we have woven theater and theatricality and ways of understanding theater into every fiber of our work at Citizen University. And that's because, as my friends Shanta Thake and Oscar Eustace at the Public in New York often remind us, theater and democracy emerge at the same time in ancient Greece for a reason. It was not an accident. They emerged at the same time because both of them were forms of people coming together to express collective aspiration, to express collective imagination, to name their fears of their history, the shame they have about themselves, the anxiety they have about each other, and the horror they have about the future. To name all of those things, not only the nice stuff, not only the hopes, but to name that pain. Democracy and theater emerge at the same time in the same way to enact the miracle of what the sociologist Emile Durkheim called a group sacralizing the miracle of its own existence, of its own creation. That was, by the way, Durkheim's description of religion. Religion is a group sacralizing the miracle of its own creation. We at Citizen University speak a lot about civic religion, which is not blind worship, not saying that the United States has been exceptional and perfect, quite the opposite actually, but recognizing that there is a creed that we profess to believe in the United States, a creed with words that we've all used: equal justice under law, liberty and justice for all, we the people. And that if we are to be anything other than completely nihilistic and cynical about those words, that we have to face those words by facing our history, facing ourselves, facing each other, and facing our future. Not just with happy talk, but also not just with self-hate. Not just with criticism, but also with acknowledgement of the miracle. And this is what theater does. This is what theater is for. When I think about all of the theater artists that I've had the opportunity to work with in our work at Citizen University, Lynn Nottage in the creation of Sweat, David Henry Hwang in the creation of plays like Chinglish and Soft Power, Tony Kushner in the restaging of Angels in America. I think about the ways in which we've worked not only with individual artists like that, but with institutions. We had a project at Citizen University called The Joy of Voting, in which theater artists around the country started rekindling a culture that used to exist in the United States, but kind of died around the time television arrived, a culture of joyous, raucous public participation and creation around voting and elections, street theater, open air debates, carnival, the kind of stuff that people need to feel part of something greater than themselves. You know everything I'm talking about here. You live everything I'm talking about here. And not just the celebratory parts, and not just the parts that are about self-flagellation. You know that it is possible in any one of those plays that I just named: Angels in America, Sweat, Father Comes Home from the Wars. Any great play of the modern era, to say nothing of the classics, any great play of our increasingly diverse canon recognizes humanity in all its complexity, recognizes the contradictions and the hypocrisy, not only of our society in a way that is about yelling at America, but of our own human hearts in a way that looks ourselves in the eye and in the mirror and says, I too contain multitudes, and multitudes not only of beauty and wonder, but multitudes of selfishness and hate and self-hate. Our job together as citizens, as citizen artists, as creators of theater, as practitioners of democracy, is to complicate the story. And even in this time of reckoning around race and injustice, where it can feel very righteous to get on board with that work. And I like having moral purpose, but I caution us all about too much righteousness. Civic religion properly practiced is not about righteous certitude, it is about doubt. It is about discernment. It is about shades of gray. It is about seeing the hypocrisy in our own hearts. It is not so much about impression management and the performance of virtue, but it is about recognizing the ways in which we are all failed, we are all fallen, we are all faltering, and we are all trying to do one notch better. And that to close the gap between our creed and our deeds is the very definition of true patriotism. To close the gap between our professed ideals and the ways we're actually living is the actual definition of artistry. You are all closing that gap. We are all trying to close that gap. And that's why we are all part of this great moment, not only of reckoning, not only of repair, but to use the word that's so central to your work right now at TCG, of refounding. Let us refound TCG. Let us refound the theater sector, the arts community. Let us refound the United States of America right now together by recognizing that a citizen and an artist, a practitioner of theater and a practitioner of democracy are not different things. They are one and the same. And we together can show the rest of this country how to live like citizens. Thank you very much. I recognize here that I got myself caught up in righteous enthusiasm and have left a little less time than we initially had intended for this conversation, but it is now truly my pleasure to introduce Hannah into the conversation. And Hannah Fenlon, I want to say this about you. Hannah participated in something we run at Citizen University called Civic Saturday Fellowship. And this is a program where we train people from all around the country to lead these gatherings called Civic Saturdays. Civic Saturdays are like a civic analog to a faith gathering. They're not church or mosque or synagogue, but they have the arc and the flow of such a gathering where you meet strangers, we sing together, you hear readings of texts that you might think of as civic scripture. There's a civic sermon where someone tries to make sense of our times, and then we form into circles where we make commitments about what we're going to do together in our community for our community. One of our earliest Civic Saturdays was actually held at the Public in New York City. Theater artists around the country have been trained as Civic Saturday Fellows in our program that we call the Civic Seminary to lead these gatherings in their theaters, in their communities, for their communities. And Hannah is just the latest of one of those fellows, but one of our most kind of passionate about connecting the dots between theater and democracy in these ways. So Hannah, I'm so glad to get to spend a little time with you here in conversation.
Oh my gosh, it's absolutely my honor. I see some Citizen University folks in the chat. Hey, Tatum. And I'm just thrilled to join you, and not just because I have planned one or two of these conference things in the past, and these are my friends and colleagues, but also, of course, because I have that really incredible privilege to be a part of the Civic Saturday Fellowship process, which has been transformational for me and really given me a lot of clarification and new language for the work that I want to do. And I'm just endlessly grateful to you and the folks at Citizen University. So I want to move very quickly. I'm going to do, I'm Hannah, she, her, and just to share a quick description of me. I am a white woman with long brown hair, seated in front of a sort of neutral colored wall. You can see a bit of the moon is feminist art hanging behind me, as well as a mirror. And I am wearing a navy blue shirt with white polka dots. And I want to remind folks, we only have maybe about 10 minutes, but I want to remind folks of the Padlet where you can pop in questions. And we've already got some juicy ones. So Eric, I'm going to bring those right in right away. Oh gosh, this group is, I know who's here, so I know this is a smart group. I do not necessarily know who's asked the question. So if you're writing a new one in and you want to say, this is from blah, 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 to indicate your authorship, please go ahead and do that. But I'm going to move right into one about power at the intersection of oppression. And this person asks, I'm curious about Eric's perspective on responsibility and power as it connects with people from oppressed groups who also hold power or privilege. It's a particular strategy for people oppressed for one part of their identity to use, oppressed for one part of their identity, so holding one oppressed identity, to use whatever power they have to change the tides of power. So how can folks prevent that from becoming a shield from responsibility, accountability, and integrity to then wield their privilege and power in harmful ways?
What a rich question. I think if you are someone whose identity is subordinated in some aspects of our society, and you happen to have access to or wield power or privilege of some kind right now, it really comes back to the word I tried to use earlier, which was circulation. I think one of the things that, if any of us, actually one exercise I would invite all of you to do some point over the next couple of days of this conference is take an inventory of your own power. And some of you might be like, oh, that'll be easy. I don't have any power, right? Wrong. Every one of you, you have people power, you have relational power, you have ideas power, you have the ability to create new narratives. You have the power to mobilize money. You have all these different sources of power that I described. Once you take that inventory and you realize, oh, that's a not insignificant mound of capital there of different kinds. Once you see that mound of capital, you face a very binary choice. Shall I hoard or shall I circulate? And the reason why I want to suggest this exercise is for everybody, but particularly for people in the category of person named in that question, is that the temptation when you're in that category is to hoard. Like, okay, I made it, I got in here, and just by my presence, I'll consider that kind of, I gave it the office, right? Just by being here, I'm already doing work. And my answer is no. Like, that is hoard or circulate, right? And circulation only means active, continuous circulation. Am I trying to share what I know, share my connections, share my insight, use the shield of my own reputational power to bring more people into the fold, more people from groups that have been oppressed, dominated, subordinated, disfavored, right? That is literally the impetus for Citizen University. I've worked many years in politics. I have a lot of connections. And at a certain point, I realized that same binary choice: shall I hoard or shall I circulate? And every one of us has to make that choice. And I see a lot of commentary in chat about scarcity, right? Hoarding, again, Professor COVID has reminded us, taught us painfully, that we are most inclined to hoard when we fear that life is zero sum, when we fear that everything is about scarcity. And it takes faith, it takes mutual faith to believe that power is infinite, and that if you circulate, you're not going to be a sucker who's taken advantage of by everybody else. You're actually doing something that will be what Alexis de Tocqueville called self-interest properly understood, because true self-interest is mutual interest, right? And so I think, anyway, that's my reaction to that. And I think, if the question, you can name particular forms of, as an Asian American in a time right now where Asian Americans are increasingly the subject, not the victims or the objects, not only of actual hate crime violence, but of an alienizing narrative in which all Asian Americans are presumed foreign until proven otherwise. I cannot hide behind the fact that, well, I got plenty of friends who know I'm American. I've got plenty of credentials and, everything. I've got to spend some capital to help push back against this. I've got to spend capital to help empower people who are fighting against anti-Asian hate. And again, hoard or circulate. Let's make time for some more questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're coming in. The next question I'm seeing, to get a little wonky, is to hear you talk a bit more about middle out economics. So this person's asking, are indicating that they'd love to hear more about middle out economics and how we can get there as a society, and how arts and culture can help leverage this shift.
Very quickly, one of the books that I've written is called Gardens of Democracy, which is actually perfect for your ecology theme of this gathering. And in that book, my co-author Nick Hanauer and I lay out the argument for middle out economics. So if you find that book, if you Google middle out economics, you'll see a lot about both the conceptual theory and the practice of it. In my own life as a citizen, I was very engaged in the Fight for 15 here in Seattle. And it succeeded, and we became the first large city to go to 15. And it succeeded because we made a political and rhetorical choice to argue for the minimum wage, not as niceness, not as charity to people who don't have enough money, but again, as mutual interest, as we're all better off when we're all better off. And so how, to the second part of the question, how can you in the arts and theater community adapt this? Many ways. I mean, literally in the argument that you can make for higher wages within your field, but I think also figuratively too, in recognizing that, you know, the middle out theory is not just about wages and money capital, it's about all other forms of capital. So should people who are middle and low wage earners in the theater world have more clout, have more say, have more participatory opportunities to shape, program, artistic choices, direction in the theater? Absolutely, right? And so be thinking about how, you know, again, I know theater enough, and certainly in New York, but in every community in the country, because of trickle-down habits, theater often is oriented toward the pleasures and the preferences of the wealthy. What will they like? What will potential donors, what will potential underwriters want? You know, and I get it, that's real. And there's a real opportunity to start bringing in the voices of people in a middle out and bottom up way to shape everything to shape every part of the theater experience. And I think, you know, the watchword of our age is participation. So ways that theaters have had to adapt during the pandemic aren't just about tech and Zoom and what works online. This has been a huge opportunity for theaters, and some have capitalized upon it and some have not, to actually, by orders of magnitude, increase opportunities for people to participate in the making of theater, to look behind the curtain and see how it's made, to see what a reading looks like, to see a play in development, to see what dramaturgists do, to see the whole thing, right? What an opportunity right now for people who have only felt like audience, or who have not felt access to this, to have access to it. That's part of the middle out spirit too.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Thank you, Eric. I think we have time for one more per what Sam just put in the chat. And I'm happy to sort of swerve outside of the really immediate concerns of how we make theater and how we engage as theater artists to something that is more of a national concern and international concern, which is a question someone has about the idea of refounding. And they're asking and saying that they'd love to hear your thinking about this idea of refounding the US. Very specifically, can imperial borders drawn without consent and enforced through ongoing violence continue to exist in a refounding? You have thoughts on that?
So another document I will refer you all to is a recent report called Our Common Purpose. I'll show you the hard copy, actually, to keep it handy here. This report was the final product of a commission of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences that I co-chaired with Danielle Allen, a scholar at Harvard, and Stephen Heinz of the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. We had a commission of 30 or so academics, practitioners, all about reinventing democracy for the 21st century. And in this report, we talk explicitly about this idea of refoundings. That's why I was so delighted to see that language so prominent in the ways that you all are talking about your work. So in the American context, there was the founding that we think of in, you know, the period between 1776 and 1787. You can think of the Civil War as the second founding of the United States, and the Civil War amendments to the Constitution, most notably the 14th Amendment. which promises equal citizenship for all, but to say nothing of the 13th and 15th Amendments as part of that second founding of the United States. The third founding, of course, was the Civil Rights Movement, in which the promissory note of the Constitution and the amended Constitution, to use MLK's language, was being cashed. And the gap between those promises and the actual institutions of Jim Crow and white supremacy were being challenged. I would submit that, and we in our commission submit, that we are now living through the fourth founding of the United States. And that is both about the racial reckoning and the ways in which we understand that white domination and subordination of non-white, non-favored groups persists institutionally, attitudinally in the United States. But it's also about, again, on the affirmative, the recognition that we live in a time right now where we're going to finally put to the test whether it is possible on planet Earth to create a mass, multiracial, multi-faith democratic republic. It's never been done in human history. Planet Earth hasn't seen one yet. Mahatma Gandhi, when he was once asked during his fight for independence in India, what do you think of Western civilization? He said, I think it would be a good idea. And I would say the same about American democracy. What do you think about American democracy? I think it would be a good idea. Let's enact it. Let's create it. And that fourth founding creates an opportunity for civic imagination of the kind that we've been talking about here and that you all practice in theater. But it also requires us to work with the world, The specific nut of the question about borders. This is a longer conversation. Borders matter, in my view. Nation states still matter. I do not believe that we're going to have in anything other than, well, I believe that the idea of global citizenship is going to remain mainly a rhetorical construct until Martians invade. And that is because in the context of our planet, nation states, for all of their flaws, for all of their imperial history, for all of their sins, remain still the most functional agency of moral action. And again, we have seen this during the pandemic. When you have a massive health crisis, when you just personally lose your health insurance, you do not petition the WHO. You do not go to the United Nations. You do not ask China for help. You petition the United States Congress for redress. You petition the United States Congress for remedy. You petition the form of government you have in your nation to do something about this. And the thing about life in the United States is that if we're ever going to have global citizenship, truly global governance, if that day ever comes to pass, it will only have been because we achieved American citizenship. Because we actually delivered on this theoretical promise of a mass, multiracial, multi-faith democratic republic. We are the world. And if we can't do it within the confines of the United States, build an inclusive, just, anti-domination society where we're all better off when we're all better off. If we can't do it here, what makes you think it can be done at the world scale? So for those of you committed to that global vision, commit now to the practice of making it happen here in the United States. And I think that is something that, in the context of that, will there be arguments about borders? Will there be argument about land back? The hashtag land back and the movement land back. You bet. Let us have those debates. Things may change. The borders of states may change. DC may become a state and the Dakotas may merge, right? Everything is fluid and power is infinite. Practice your power with imagination. That's my final watchword.
Eric, thank you so much. I know folks are cheering and snapping and clapping all in their individual living rooms. And I just want to say that your capacity to offer so much nuance and wisdom all in like these short little bites, kind of like it blows me away. And your capacity to do that at the same time as you are offering us all an invitation into that same power, into our own power, is like, it's the mark of someone who has a literacy of power and also the mark of someone who is truly a deeply wonderful human. So
Thank you, Hannah. And I want to thank everybody at TCG. And you use the word invitation. I want to invite everyone in TCG to join us at Citizen University. I believe my colleague Tana
Yes.
put our organization in the chat, citizenuniversity.us. Become a citizen, become a Civic Saturday Fellow like Hannah. Join one of our youth programs. Lead a workshop to teach power in your own community. When I think about our board member, Stephanie Ibarra, and how she and others catalyzed the whole Dear White American Theater movement, apply these skills to your domain and your sector, apply them to your life and your neighborhood and your block, apply them to our country and to the world right now. But join us at Citizen University. We would so love to have you and to learn with you and to learn from you. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Teresa. Thank you, Adrian. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Eric.
I love being with you.
Thank you,
Eric.
Teresa.
Hannah, Eric. That was incredible. We are all coming to Citizen University. You're going to get every single person who's on this, watching this. And I can tell you, you gave us so much to think about and so much clarity. And the chat was on fire, as you could see. So really fantastic. And just the couple of, frameworks that you gave us, character plus power equals citizenship, and really talking through the 3 laws of power. You had lots of other things, just, really beautiful things to also share with us, like practicing our power with imagination. And I could go on, but I think you really gave us something wonderful to ground us as we go forward into this conference. And I know we're going to be talking about what you just said to us throughout these next weeks and for months and years to come. We're going to refound this place. Thank you. And Hannah, thanks for coming in and doing such a beautiful job of moderating.
Thank you all so much.
I also want to thank you. You all have noticed that we've had ASL interpreters working very hard to make sure that this session is accessible as possible. So thank you, Rodney Laban and Suzanne Lightborn. I have a few updates to share, and I also want to ask you all to hang on with us because we have a special surprise in a minute. So my updates, my little housekeeping, I want to make sure you're already on Mighty Networks and connecting with friends. So make sure you check out our virtual TCG bookstore. I don't know if we have Eric's books in there, but we'll find a way to make sure people can get Eric's books as well. There's not only some great content, but there are discounts on TCG books as well. And if you have any questions about Mighty Networks, please email conference@tcg.org. Second thing, in the chat, you're going to find a link for a feedback form. We will drop these feedback forms in the chat at the end of each session throughout the conference, and just really encourage you to go and give us your feedback right away. Tell us what you thought about this session. Tell us about what you think of all the sessions you attend, because it helps us plan for future TCG programming. And last, but certainly not least, I am thrilled to welcome a very special guest, someone who has been a powerful ally to our field when we need him most, and someone who looked quite dapper sporting his Save Our Stages mask at the inauguration. Yes, people, I am talking about our friend and great arts advocate, Senate Majority Leader Charles Schumer.
Hi, everyone. This is Senator Chuck Schumer, and thank you so much for letting me share a brief message at TCG's annual conference. It's been a Hi, everyone. This is Senator Chuck Schumer, and thank you so much for letting me share a brief message at TCG's annual conference. It's been a hard year for all of us, but few have faced the challenges that those in the performing arts have faced over the last year. When we started this crisis, live venues, theaters, and concert halls were some of the first to close, and unfortunately, they'll be some of the last to open up. And yet, few things are as enduring as in society as the arts. Few things stay with us, move us, and inspire us to overcome our present struggles as the work all of you do. And of course, my home state of New York would be nothing without theater. So I'm so grateful that all of you have come together and not only kept the faith during these hard times, but also have come together at this conference to talk about how theater can thrive in the months and years to come. How we can use the arts to break barriers, empower the downtrodden, and lift up new voices. Only the arts can do that, and few can, quite like theater. Once this pandemic is over, we'll need our artists, musicians. We'll need the theater to bring us together and help us make sense of this incredibly difficult moment in our history. We're going to give you some help already. At the end of last year, I was proud to pass the law, the Save Our Stages law, and $15 billion to implement it. The new SBA program will help stages and other cultural institutions pay the bills and get through the next few months until life gets back to normal. And in good measure, we provided another $1.25 billion for the program in the recent American Rescue Plan and made sure venues and other small nonprofits became eligible for PPP through a new Stages grant. We've worked on this funding for months, and I'm happy to say the program is now launched and venues are able to apply for relief right now. In other words, help is on the way for our wonderful performers and our great venue operators. We will get through this together. So my best to all of you. Thanks for your work, and may you all stay healthy and safe.